Now that you've retired or planning to retire, what are you going to do with all the skills that you've learned and mastered over the last 20, 30, or 40 years? Watch this episode and we'll go through the possibilities of what we could do with those skills. My work life began the minute I got off the bus at Great Lakes in the Recruit Training Center. Before that, I had never really worked. I pumped gas and did a few little odd jobs, but that's where my work life began. And what did I learn? Very quickly, discipline. I learned to listen because before that moment, I had no discipline. I never made my bed. I never cooked my own meals. I never washed my own clothes. I lived in an Italian house with a mother and grandmother who did all those things for me. I was not self-sufficient. But when I got to boot camp, self-sufficiency, working with the team, those two skills I learned immediately. Learning how to listen, because if you didn't listen and you didn't follow orders, well, there was a price to pay. And I learned very quickly those are skills that would carry me the rest of my life. After boot camp and advanced training school, my first duty station was the submarine base in Groton, Connecticut, where I quickly learned that you were not an island. You worked with a team. The discipline and self-sufficiency that you learn in boot camp carries all the way through, as I said, and carries through my life. So in my duty station, I learned to work with a team because you can't do anything alone. You learn to mentor those subordinates underneath you. I climbed the ladder pretty quickly. I was a good listener because I knew that was the way to success, listening. So that skill I put into use right away, and there you have it, climb the ladder, and I learned to work with the team, and I learned to work with subordinates and follow orders on my own, obviously. I think the greatest skill that I learned from my military years was discipline. Because before that, I had none. I grew up in New York City, and I just had very, very, very little discipline. The military instilled that discipline in me, which I carried through my whole work life. So after the military, I went back to school. I had a couple of years college before I went in, and I went to business school, got a degree in business with an accounting focus, and my first job was as a forensic accountant. Those of you who don't know what a forensic accountant is, we're hired by attorneys or insurance companies to investigate the cause, not necessarily causation, but the outcome of an event. What's the economic peril because of a particular event? And I worked major cases around the globe. And I did that for most of my career. While I was a forensic accountant, I also took the test in California and became a licensed private investigator. And also, I was a certified fraud examiner. So my whole career had to do with investigations, had to do with study of the law, how business acumen and analytical economic data apply to the law. So I know it sounds a little stuffy, but the reality is all of those skills really go back to the discipline that I learned in boot camp. My professional work life, I started as a staff forensic accountant, worked my way up to a senior, then a supervisor, then a manager, and then they offered me ownership, a partnership. And I had only been working professionally for 7 years. So I thought that was pretty unheard of back then. And I became an owner in the firm, and from that, I worked there many years, and then I went on to other companies, had a partner that another company absorbed us, took us in, and The skills I learned from that, one, negotiation. But it always goes back to discipline. Discipline is always the overriding skill. But then there was negotiation skills, people skills. How do you deal with people in all different walks of life? As a forensic accountant or an investigator, you're interviewing business owners, business managers, individuals from all walks of life. If you try to get information with a hammer, that's not going to happen. You know, movies and television, the way they portray investigators, it's like, yeah, where were you on the night of the 15th? It's not like that at all. You want to take them into your confidence and gather information. You want to let them know that you're there to help them, but they have to give you something in return. So people skills were another one. How to deal with your employees, how to deal with your business partners, because that's a big skill. How do you deal with clients? All of those skills, uh, add up into this great stew of skills. Like if I were to take inventory, and maybe you should consider doing that yourself, taking inventory from the first day you ever worked until you retired of all the skills uh, that you've earned and learned and mastered. You'd be amazed. I was working as a fraud examiner, an investigator, and forensic accountant. I wrote a lot of papers for publications. So that's another skill I had to learn, how to write, uh, I guess the instructive manuals. I did a loss prevention manual for a uh, major department store, but I also wrote papers that were published that if you made a mistake, and it could be held against you when you're brought in to be a witness, because they're going in a deposition, they're going to have that, and they're going to ask you a question. Did you write this on so-and-so date that this is the result of that? So they'll question you on everything you've written, everything you've published. So those are skills. There are many skills within that, the writing skills and making sure that my data is correct, proofreading, working with your peers to help you make sure you're not saying things that are factually incorrect that could be held against you at a later time. So all of those things were valuable. Uh, I testified a lot on a witness stand. I testified, I think, 35 times as a as an economic expert, as an investigative expert. And those skills in dealing with how to answer a question clearly without over answering the question, which would give an attorney reason to ask a follow-up question. So those are skills that you learn by doing and doing and doing. Learning how to simplify your answer so that a jury could pick it up and just understand what your position is. All of those skills I learned, and where they go now in my life, well, that's a question, and that's the topic of this video here. So after 40 years doing the work that I did as an investigator, forensic accountant, certified fraud examiner, what do I do with all of those skills in my retirement? Or do I do anything? Do I just play golf? Well, I'm not the type of person who could just sit down and take a lifetime of work and just chuck it like it never happened. So here are some of the things that you might want to consider. Now, they don't have to, or they may not seemingly appear to be directly in line with what your work life was. Like I'm no longer licensed as a private investigator because when I retired, I didn't renew my license. So I can't go out there and do investigative work. But I could certainly teach someone how to do it. I can mentor a young investigator how to build his business. In LA, a lot of the investigators were off-duty cops or retired cops, but they didn't have the business acumen to grow the business. Now, you could be a one-man shop as an investigator, but if you want to really grow the business, that's a whole other skill that has nothing to do directly with being an investigator. If you want to be a forensic accountant, well, there are certain skills that you need, but primarily you need to be degreed. You need to have a business degree, an accounting degree, and maybe a master's, an MBA, maybe a master's and PhD in economics, because that's who you're going to go up against on the witness stand. So there are a lot of skills. So how do you use them in your retirement years? Well, let's go back to the very first skill that I learned, which was discipline. All right, so I'm a disciplined person. This is a skill that I've learned back almost 50 years ago in boot camp. How do I utilize that? Well, by doing this video, by listing out all of the skills in my work life that I've gained. And because I have the discipline, I can somehow utilize this or come up with a reason for applying a skill to a post-work life. Mentoring, volunteering, teaching. They all take discipline to do that, to find out, well, what do you go about? How do I find out where I can volunteer? Who should I mentor? Well, if you have the discipline, you could do the research. You do the research, you find out, okay, so this particular organization needs this skill set. How can I help them? All of that comes into play. So you do the research, you find out what organization needs your skill set, and trust me, many of them do. With job cuts and everything that's going on, they'd be more than happy to take retired volunteers. You could do that. You could mentor young, like I said earlier, you could mentor young investigators or new investigators, I should say. New forensic accountants. You can help people build a business. All of these skills. Or if you don't want to do anything that was directly applicable to what you did in your work life, there are other skills: working with people, listening, discipline, which is the overriding skill, I think. Working, even if you worked as a counter in Walmart, you're still working with people. You still have to be personable. You're still greeting people. You're still, checking bags that go out the door. You're still having a relationship with people. Those are skills. They may seem benign, but they are a skill, and an important skill, because you can't go anywhere during a work life without having those skills. So don't think, if you worked in a factory for 40 years, you have no skills other than putting a widget here to a widget there, or pulling a lever. No, you have plenty of skills. You had to take orders, you had to listen, you had to learn how things were done. If that machine breaks, you probably know how to troubleshoot that machine. You could do all of those things. And all of those skills that may not seem like a lot, or that may not seem like, all right, how do I teach somebody this? You'd be shocked on the skills that you've learned. I suggest you sit down one morning, get a cup of coffee, you go back in time to your first job and say, okay, what did I do? I worked at this store, and I had to I worked in a hardware store, so I had to fill the shelves with nuts and bolts. Yeah, where's the skill in that? Well, you had to know where the nuts and bolts went, so you had to listen. You had to take orders from your superiors. You had to work with other people. If someone came by and said, excuse me, where can I find a Phillips screwdriver? You have to turn around and smile and be personable and show them the way. And if you don't know the way, you're smart enough then to say, you know what, I don't really know, I'm new here, but perhaps you can ask that person over there with the blue vest and they can help you. So those are skills. Everything that we've done over a lifetime earns skills. So my suggestion is to share that knowledge with young people, with anybody who wants to know. Um, what about even doing what I'm doing now? I'm sitting here talking to a camera, telling people that are hopefully watching this about my story. You could do that if you if you were a mechanic, if you worked in a garden shop, if you did whatever, if you're a retired doctor. You have an amazing amount of skill and knowledge that can be shared to as small amount of people or to a vast audience. Share the wealth. You've spent 40 years earning, learning, and mastering skills. Share it. Um, anyway, I hope you get something out of this. The thought of doing this came to me because I was at my daughter's wedding party, and she reintroduced me to a high school friend of hers whose husband is a fraud prevention, a loss prevention guy, and he was sort of at a career standstill, and he wanted to ask me some questions. So the thought came to me, you know, I'm retired, and I've been retired 7 years. Uh, I have a lot to offer. I could put somebody in the right direction. So think of that yourself. You have a lot to offer. You can put somebody in the right direction. You can help them. You have a neighbor kid next door, and they don't know what they want to do. Tell them your story. You know, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at how fascinating and interesting you can be. Anyway, that's it for this week's adventure of vet talk. So please, if you got anything out of this, hit the like button, subscribe, share this, and we will catch you on the next one.